What the
What the
heck
heck is
happening?
What the heck is happening?
Hallo und herzlich willkommen bei einer neuen Folge des Trending Topics Podcasts. Mein Name ist Oliver Janko. Es gibt eine große Nachfrage auf dem Arbeitsmarkt, allerdings nur nach ganz bestimmten Personen. Das sagt Lydia Goutas, Managing Partner bei Lehner Executive Partners. Die gebürtige New Yorkerin leitet ein internationales Team, das wachsende multinationale Unternehmen in europäischen Regionen betreut, insbesondere in den Bereichen Finanzdienstleistungen, einschließlich Banken, Versicherungen, Fintechs, Professional Services und IT. Die Digitalisierung führe nicht nur zu neuen Produkten und Prozessen, sondern auch zu einer sich verändernden Belegschaft, erklärt sie. Das hat Auswirkungen auf den Arbeitsmarkt. Eine steigende Unsicherheit, sich ändernde Anforderungen und die Angst vor einer drohenden Rezession beschäftigen Wirtschaft und Expertinnen. Führungskräfte müssen sich auf neue Situationen einstellen. Eine dieser Expertinnen ist eben Lydia, die international an diesen Themen forscht. Vorab noch eine kurze Anmerkung. Dieser Podcast wird ab sofort auf Englisch geführt, zumindest das Interview selbst, meine Verabschiedung dann wieder auf Deutsch. So, und jetzt begrüße ich recht herzlich Lydia Goutas im Podcast. Lydia, nice to meet you and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And it's interesting, in my introduction, I just wanted to add that because of my international role, I do work actually globally, so I can comment on more than just what's happening in Europe. I can comment on the comparison also with the US.
Okay, great. Maybe we start with the wide topic of leadership. Which type of leaders are the best ones who are recession-proof and that companies are looking for at the moment?
Well, the big word is change and transformation. You know, in 2019, we were already talking about recession at that point. But what happened was three crises came through at that point, from COVID to the war to the energy crisis, et cetera, and the supply chain issues. However, the people that have been needed and what did happen out of COVID was a technological transformation. And now the people that are absolutely top of the list are the chief data officers, which is a new role that has come up on the board. Chief operating officers, but under that, the definition of the role is often very similar to operations, making sure operations work, but that we're close to the customer. So roles on the C-level that are the most in demand, and I say this, are the roles that are using the data, whether it's a CMO, whether it's a CDO, whether it's a CTO, and there's a lot of overlap in those roles. Now, if we leave the roles and we look for the kind of persons we're looking for, we're looking, regardless of role, for somebody who has a tech affinity, who's not afraid of technology and not afraid of getting their hands dirty. They have to be hands-on. So just because you're a board member, this started already 2014, actually, people tried to avoid it. But now it's very clear. You have to have the credibility to be able to have the strategy and then dive down. So to see the big picture and move forward. And so those people who've handled transformation are very much in need. One of the biggest growths right now, a 30% year-on-year growth, is the search for interim managers at that level. Why? Because of the fact that they are doing the transformation, but they don't need those skills all the time. However, the newest trend has been that companies are just changing and changing. It isn't just like, oh, we're doing this one change. I had as an interview the chief risk officer of a major bank, and he was saying we used to outsource everything, and we realized that when the project comes to an end, it restarts again with something new. So now we have to hire the people inside, and it was a bank. And he said, but we're not hiring bankers, we're hiring engineers. So the engineers and the technology is becoming the norm. It's like mathematics, it just simply exists in every portion. And you have to have credibility because a lot of people who are out there are unfortunately talking a good game, but they don't have the credible examples. So credibility, pragmatic, practical, startups, for example, fintech startups and smaller institutions can't make large transformations. They don't work from the top down. They do small changes, but keeping in mind where they're eventually going. And that's how they get ahead. And that's how they're also financially stable, which is another huge huge change now that people are focusing on sustainability of the company by meaning you hire somebody, but they don't get an unlimited budget. They get a limited budget. And so that leader has to be conscious of profit and loss. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the social qualifications later on, so I won't go into social skills, if you don't mind.
Maybe first of all, we stay at the market. There's a lot of insecurity out there, as you know. Of course, there are a lot of changes. How is this economic insecurity driving the labor market? How is it changing the labor market? Or isn't it?
It's changing the dynamics. It's now a tug of war between the companies and the employees. And the problem is that many of the technical people, and I was hearing this in an industry comparison yesterday that I was attending a meeting, and one person said, the companies are offering lunches and this and that. And the person said, no, I'd rather be at home with my family instead. So that's just one aspect of it. So it is changing the dynamics that there is a big uncoupling between a company's reputation, the way it actually sees itself, and the reality. And there is also an uncoupling that happened last spring. Last spring, I was doing a search in New York and in Europe, and it was for tech HR people, global role. And I had people telling me, no, I'm living near the beach and I don't want to actually ever go into the office, and I'm happy where I am. And yes, and I also want 700,000, or I want in Europe 200,000 from a Spaniard who, frankly, we know salaries aren't that high, or maybe she was 300,000 fixed. But in any case, crypto crisis occurs. And in September, I get a bunch of calls from the very same people, and the attitude is quite different. Yes. So crypto things, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, a lot of the battles that you see going on, coupled with, I have to say one more thing, that often when you are downsizing, like Meta is doing, you're driving stock price up. But when you downsize, you create, for the first time in this workforce of high tech and the generation, they're seeing a recession that's affecting them. And so that's going to change. That's why we're having these strikes about higher wages right now and less work, because there's an uncoupling. So much of our economy is based on service and in production. And if you switch those things, then you end up, frankly, not being able to do the profits that you need. So companies are battling with their employees. And so this is a different thing. The other economic insecurity driving the labor market that happens, this is a terrible thing to say, but it happens in every country. People then try to push people who they know as friends to hire them. But what's happened now is often the people that are ultimately stuck with them, their reputations are on the line. So in the larger economic insecurity, people are still not there yet to accept conditions that are different. And I think at the end, we'll have to go to hybrid, because it definitely is a value that is demographically acceptable to a new generation of, and I say new generation because as soon as I talk to people who have kids, male or female, they don't want to spend that much time away from their families. It doesn't matter whether it's male or female. I'm doing a European search right now. And as soon as I get into the highly qualified tech people who are working, by the way, in risk, the first thing they say is, I don't want to relocate. I have 3 kids. I have 4 kids, and I really like being able to see them. So these are factors, the human factors. On the other hand, I have to say one last thing about the talent. The people who are the hungriest are the people in geographically Eastern Europe. They're very hungry. And all the countries that experienced a recession, like Spain, Portugal, Greece, very hungry. So we do see movements of companies relocating. Now with Eastern Europe, it's an old thing, but salaries have gone up. But they're more willing to work because for them, they've seen socialism where there wasn't that much opportunity. And in the other countries, Spain, Portugal, Greece, they've had their crises. So they know what it's like to be unemployed. And people left then and they were able to come back. And when the Ukraine war happened, there was a lot of Ukrainian talent. I don't know if you're aware of how much tech expertise there was in the Ukraine or is in the Ukraine.
A lot of. Our CTO is from Ukraine.
Exactly, exactly. And we see this wherever we go. We run into these really, it's a high quality talent. So when the war came up, a lot of us went after the Ukrainian talent because we knew it was unparalleled. And so there are opportunities to get people. And there also, but the balance always has to be there because there's an unspoken contract always. Beyond the physical contract, there's an unspoken contract between employer and employee, regardless of what level of management you are on.
Are geopolitics pushing the need for different strategies in HR? So, as you mentioned, the Ukraine war.
Well, they're causing insecurity. So one of the things that could be done that hasn't yet been done is, and I think in the country of Austria today, I think they announced that they will make the work permit easier. Because one of the things that has happened is geopolitics of Brexit, for example, meant that highly talented British people, it's a big thing to hire them. And often what happens is if it's too much trouble and it's going to take you 6 months to bring somebody on board and you need them earlier, you don't take them. So at the end of the day, by loosening work visas by geopolitics situations like Brexit, like a war, making it easier to hire somebody is very important to getting the talent that you need and at a price usually that is much easier to swallow in a company. But it does, you do have geopolitics causes insecurity with like the energy bills. So one of the things we've seen is that some companies during COVID, they got rid of their entire offices. I'm talking to somebody in New York. It's a Swedish company. He said, "Oh, we got rid of our office. We're all working remote." But now we've been taken over by another private equity.
Are they back now?
No, because, well, what happened was they didn't have an office. So what did happen is, see, because in the US, you're trying to push people back into the office. They were acquired because they had some economic problems by a private equity company. And then now they're going in a couple days a week. But a lot of people did this. I had a wonderful client, which is 100% remote, and they have a whole branding that they have on all their Zooms and everything, where it says, remote but always together. They are always reachable for each other. They are incredibly communicative. They value people above everything. I've never worked with such an excellent client. It was amazing to me, the collaboration, the communication during a process. And I thanked them. I couldn't believe it. They were thanking me. And I said, "No, you don't understand. You've shown how much you value every single person in your company." They're, and so the philosophies are different. Some people value people during a recession and they say, we want to keep the talent that we have. Others don't value them and they say, okay, a 45% turnover is okay. There's two parallel examples.
What's the better way for you? What do you think?
The better way is that they retain their people, because I'll tell you why. We like to help companies that are healthy. We like to help them support themselves and accompany them. The unhealthy, we're helping to transform it. That's not a problem. But if they have an unhealthy philosophy, then you don't want to be not able to stop the dripping water, because at that point, your moral job of finding someone a position that is going to be long lasting and sustainable so that they can concentrate on their job and not whether it's going to be around for tomorrow is gone. So you have we have a moral responsibility, and that's important. So that's the one thing. But a lot of times people do hiring freezes. Like right now, I heard this in the market and from some of my former clients saying that, we're not sure, our clients are not ordering things, so we're on a hiring freeze and we may even have to cost cut. We're a publicly listed company. We have to make our numbers. That's our promise to our shareholders. So that's why downsizing happens in anticipation of a recession. But I have to tell you that in our industry, we had banner years, 2001 and 2021, 2022. So while there was a recession anticipated in 2019, that was not the case. We had huge growth. But I also want to add one thing about companies, what they should be doing for the anticipation of geopolitical. They should be banding together to ask their governments to give them a break on taxes, wage-related taxes, and on visas, and so otherwise they're going to be losing their headquarters in the countries. People will move to where the talent is. That's always been the case.
Which role plays AI already in this case, and which role will it play in the upcoming years in terms of the change of the labor market?
AI doesn't eliminate, it eliminates scut jobs, as we like to say. If you're writing a report, the lawyers are already using AI for quite a few years. So, and doctors will use AI or have used it. But yes, in our industry, for example, judgment is involved. So we can't have it, the AI, it can put together maybe the CV of somebody into a format, but it maybe can take dictation. But we have to be very careful about the AI, which is, of course, programmed by humans, because, for example, ChatGPT, we were just discussing that. That it, number one, there's a data privacy issue because it always remembers what you put into it. And number two, it picks up bias in the market. So if you're dealing with people, you might end up having total garbage coming up. And if I quote, there's a really cool risk guy over at UBS who said, the AI stuff works okay, but it doesn't work in odd situations. In other words, something that's not predictable. It doesn't. And he gave a wonderful example where he showed his kids a picture of a giraffe, and they got it right, they got it wrong. Then he showed them it again. Then he showed it again. Then they went to the zoo and they saw a giraffe. And then on the way home, he showed them a picture of a giraffe in a tree. And I said, what is this? And the kid said, a giraffe. And he said, if I had to show AI to make that adjustment of the giraffe in the tree, I would have had to have 165,000 whatever or more repetitions. So judgment, he's come to the conclusion, even having been a big fan, that there must be a mixture between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. But technology will not go away. So there's going to be people who will try to have to not only properly program AI, but also steer it to make sure that it doesn't do immoral judgment decisions.
How will the labor market look in about 20 years from now?
That's an interesting point because, we can't really predict the way technology is going, but I think we'll have a challenge getting emotional intelligent people if we are so based on technology that we are unable to see between the lines. Because a lot of creativity comes from freedom, but freedom is a subjective term, isn't it?
It is.
Right, and also just coming together to collaborate. If you're not used to working with people, you can't disagree and have an interesting discussion. And so all of those social aspects, I worked prior to executive search, I worked at a university, and we always had vigorous discussions, but they were always enlightening, and they forced us to consider another person's viewpoint. And nowadays what's happening is that people are becoming more intolerant. And I think part of that is the fact that when you work with overstructure always kills creativity. So, and agile working is kind of the opposite of the remote working. So I think that I was reading an article the other day about how a CTO they were helping the tech people to feel more valued because first they would design the ad campaign and then they would design the product. And I thought that was really, really interesting. They were trying to motivate them. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting point. I'll change the topic once more. Let's take a look at, on the soft skills. Soft skills like mental resilience and the ability to adapt fast are becoming more and more important for leadership. How vulnerable are leaders that get stressed out easily?
Oh, they get fired. I tell you, I was just dealing. I replace a lot of people. This is why our business is so healthy. Is because we're replacing people who aren't able to handle stress. Some people go into a burnout, but the people who let it off on other people, it ruins a relationship nowadays. Especially if you're not always in the office and you haven't built that trust. But, you need to look at, before you start the blame game, you need to actually look at solutions. So the people who have the most, what we call in English, even-tempered, someone who is able to handle stress is the person who has the best temperament. And I'll give you a really cool example. I know a very creative CEO who years ago, before he went into financial services, and by the way, he was one of the first people who did digitalization and a digital exchange already in like 2012 or something. He started out as a surgeon, as a trauma surgeon. He was a medical doctor, trauma surgeon, and trauma surgery requires you to be really resistant to pressure. And then he went to get an MBA because he was returning to Europe, and he went to work for McKinsey. And whenever I've dealt with him, he's been able to handle a huge amount of pressure. And it verifies a study done many years ago by a financial behaviorist now, but then he was not. He was a psychologist called Thomas Oberlechner, where he studied the effect of the media on traders, on financial traders, because they have to keep their cool, regardless of whether the market is going down or up, much like a leader does. And he found out that that trait was common in financial traders that were successful, as well as medical doctors who they didn't become devastated by a mistake. And so a leader that has mental resilience is able to also lead better by example, is also able to create a calmness in his team, because nobody works well if they're frightened. And it's a domino effect. So I would say mental resilience and the ability to see a bigger picture, but also the ability to have a low ego. The most successful leaders have a low ego rather than a high ego. If you have a high ego, you miss important information. Whereas if you have a low ego, you're paying attention and listening. So being humble in order to be able to listen to other and being mentally agile are very important qualifications. Because if you're stressed out, you can't really follow somebody else. You have somebody follow you.
Yeah, of course. I'm referring to your first sentence. Isn't it a little bit extreme to fire someone right away when they are slightly stressed?
No, actually, they don't fire them right away. To be perfectly fair, they usually wait a bit. But usually, if somebody is so stressed out, at some point they reach the breaking point, and they may. It's usually a mutual decision, where they agree to disagree and separate. But and there's a difference between firing and layoff. That is an English term. To fire somebody is Entlassung. To lay off somebody is a downsizing, Kündigung, but it's for an economic reason, And I always see that often in the German language, people misuse that term. And Entlassung's pretty bad when you say somebody's been fired. Oh, the company was having problems, so they fired all these people. No, they laid them off. Really important, because even good, well-qualified people are laid off just because they're expensive or if they're older.
But it's a tough environment, isn't it?
It's a very tough environment. And I have to say it's also a tough environment because we're going into like a totally different area, like diversity. We're getting a lot of demands to create very diverse slates. And sometimes it can be hard because you do see people who are very qualified, but if they duplicate somebody else, you can't include them. You have to have the diverse slate. And I don't mean only gender. I mean everything from ethnic background, race, age, and also different backgrounds, which might help, like banks are taking people from telcos and Amazon, etc. Those kinds of backgrounds are very healthy for an institution.
So the more diverse, the better?
Yes, the team that is more diverse has more ideas. And I'll give you a local example in Austria, that many years ago, when there was inside BAWAG, there was another bank that was built that was the first direct bank. And it was built by a brilliant woman called Sonja Sarkozy. And she was 26 years old, and she took, or maybe even younger, she took a bunch of non-bankers and built this direct bank because she understood that they would understand the customer more than a typical banker would. I'm giving financial services the example because it's easier. However, one of the things that we can do better in Europe is the idea of service.
Okay. Last question. We are good on time. But the last question. Let's take a look at Europe and the market in Europe. We are facing a recession. Yeah. Where do you see hope for European companies?
Well, I'm a little more optimistic. I think that the recession may not be as bad as you anticipate, because we are very, very dependent on the U.S., and the U.S. is not in a recession. A lot of what they're doing is political. Okay, so what we do need to do as countries, as companies need to figure out. Unfortunately, it's hard decisions again. They're going to have to make investments as well in upgrading technology in order to make it recession-proof or less vulnerable. But they also are going to probably have to move certain functions into low-cost areas where the taxes are also, and the real estate and everything else is lower. And we're already seeing that. We see companies pulling out of England, which had considered England a very positive area. Costs are high. Labor costs are high. So this is the major challenge that is facing companies. And they need to be a little bit more creative about thinking how are they going to get into other ways? And we've seen this with a big trend now into getting into things that are energy based. With every recession, there's also opportunity. So industries that are now, during COVID, the healthcare industry just boomed like crazy. And now they're disappointed because they're slowing down, but their growth between 2018 and now was dramatic. And now is going to be alternative energy sources and anything that has to do with that. But companies, again, have to go back to the government and start asking for things that make it easier for them to get the talent and make those investments, like cutting down costs, not just having to let people go, but actually, reducing wage-related costs. And so that people can actually, they can offer better salaries and have the right people in there and changing visas.
That also depends on the government.
That does. And so it's very political. Exactly. But it's true also in the U.S. During the Trump era, the financial services industry really boomed. And then everybody was anticipating that Biden would do something different. But ironically, he's more middle of the road. So they've been, up until Silicon Valley and Signature, they weren't doing so badly. I'm curious to know, and I don't know, I think we have the right tools here to balance the recession, because I know that our banking laws, let's put it this way, the difference between the recession in 2001, the dot-com, was that it was in one sector, the IT tech, and the recovery was relatively fast, because there were also new inventions and new opportunities there as well. And because we had inflated startups in those days, just used to get a ton of money, they had a high burn rate. And people gave high salaries as opposed to low and hired tons of people. The recession in 2008 was much more serious because financial services is the foundation of every other business. And what Europe has done very well since that time is set up a lot of regulations that actually protect us from having banks go under. So we mustn't look at Wirecard or the local Commercialbank or Credit Suisse as examples of a huge trend. They are the exception. So I would say, yes, we might have a small blip and we won't be growing as much, but I don't think we'll have the recession that we anticipate.
Okay, let's see where the journey goes. Very exciting insights. Thank you, Lydia. Maybe we will repeat the conversation in a few months and see how the situation will be then. Thank you.
Yes, you'll call me to task. If it happens, yeah? Thank you, Oliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Vielen, vielen Dank unseren Zuhörerinnen und Zuhörern fürs Dabeisein. Bis zum nächsten Mal.